Hi, I'm Britt Dewey, and this is my EDL 854 Module 12 case study titled The Budget Debacle. Section 1 is summarizing the case. This case took place at the Briardale Elementary School. So the Briardale Elementary School is trying to raise money for the school, and they typically do so through a foundation called the Briarsdale Foundation. This district it's a large district, it's an urban area, and they have some major competition between the schools to raise money. So each school has set up a foundation to help with fundraising efforts. Okay, so Mr. Santos is the elementary principal at the school, and then Mr. Barely is the new president of the Briarsdale Foundation, which oversees the fundraising efforts. A little bit more about Mr. Barely. He's a Harvard grad, and he has some ideas on how he can be beneficial to the fundraising effort, which we'll discuss here in a bit. So he came up with the idea of selling raffle tickets to raise money for the school. He pitched the idea, and then the whole school was on board with this idea. Tickets were sold, and then on the night of the drawing for the winner, the local sheriff shows up and arrested Mr. Barely, and this resulted in embarrassment for the school, of course. But he was booked and then later released, and he was charged with a misdemeanor. And all of this occurred at the elementary school. The elementary school is kind of a community hub for people in communities, so they host various events. And in this particular event, the media coverage and the events did not look good for the school. Section 2 is looking at any legal or ethical issues. So some legal issues that I found involved in this case. Obviously, there was some sort of law that was broken because there was a misdemeanor charge issued to Mr. Barely. Two separate entities are involved in the case. So the school and the Briarsdale Foundation were involved, and that's actually, in my opinion, the major issue in this case. Typically, organizations cannot hire or use an outside organization to conduct raffles. So I think this is the biggest issue in this case. And then also, depending on the state that this took place, I know in Kansas you would have to have a license to actually participate and host a raffle. So maybe there was a failure to obtain a license. And then ethical issues. Some people might view raffles as gambling, and then some people, depending on their religious beliefs, might not want to participate in this sort of event and they maybe wouldn't want their school to host such an event. So Section 3, synthesize. The Briarsdale Elementary School and the Briarsdale Foundation collaborated on a raffle fundraiser to raise money for the school, which ended in an arrest and embarrassment for the school. All right, so let's look at some of the facts we know. People involved: Mr. Santos, he's the principal. Mr. Barely, he's the president, the new president of the Briarsdale Foundation. This takes place in an urban school district, particularly the Briardale Elementary School. And again, this is one school in a large urban district, and it's important to note that all these schools are competing with each other to raise as much money as they can to benefit their individual school. And the programs, so we have the Briardale Elementary School again, the Briarsdale Foundation, and again, these are two separate entities technically because the foundation is outside of the school. Even though they collaborated on it, it's still not a good look because just kind of where does the money go when the Briarsdale Foundation raises the money? So there's just some issues there that don't look so good. Okay, review. The incident resulted in bad publicity for the school and the school's community. It's a bad look for Mr. Santos and Mr. Barley specifically, as they are the leaders of the two organizations. Mr. Barley was charged with a misdemeanor, and then he was placed on probation as well. So next steps. Obviously, the school district needs more training and some thought process on fundraising efforts. And then from these trainings, they need to set up guidelines and some policies to help ensure that rules and laws are not broken in the future. So what are our options, and what are those options' consequences? Option 1 would be to take no action. This removes the principal from involvement, but this would show a lack of professional leadership. Um, you could try to save face here and just say you didn't have anything to do with it, and then hopefully you would hope that the school would not um, get in any more legal issues. But um, I don't think that would look very good for the school or the principal. Kind of just throws the other foundation under the bus, and that's not a good look for the school. Option 2 would acknowledge that a mistake was made, so the principal would come out and say, "This is what happened. We didn't anticipate this happening, but just acknowledge that it was a mistake and that you're going to learn from that mistake." And then along with this, I think the district has to take control of all fundraising efforts. That would ensure that this doesn't happen again. Um, and then it also ensures that no outside entities would control funds. Next steps: educate persons involved in fundraising efforts. So anybody who comes up with a fundraising idea or hosts an event would need to be educated so they can follow any state laws and guidelines. And then I think it would be another beneficial step to create and record a list of fundraising opportunities and then kind of set guidelines for each opportunity that you come up with. So if you want to host a raffle in the future, here's what you need to do. For one, you need to obtain a license to ensure that you are protected from breaking any laws, and that the state knows that you are hosting a raffle. And then the list goes on for any other things that you can think of as far as fundraising efforts. Okay, section 7, evaluate the options. So option 1 again was taking no action. A pro of this, it maybe distance yourself from the situation. The obvious con that would be you're viewed as a weak leader, and then this could potentially lead to more violations in the future because you didn't address the problem that needed addressing initially. Option 2, acknowledge that a mistake was made and the school takes over fundraising efforts altogether. Pros: allows for a learning experience. You can use this as a teachable moment that we're all humans, and humans make mistakes. And when you make mistakes, it's important to learn from those mistakes, own up to it, and then learn from it, and then move forward. The next pro: it can work to make a positive and necessary changes for your fundraising efforts in the future. So again, back to the previous slide, set guidelines and policies to help ensure that your school doesn't go through any more legal issues involved in fundraising efforts. And then can work to avoid unlawful actions in the future. Again, I just said that. Cons: shows you had a lack of judgment. So obviously if you own up to a mistake, it does show that you made a poor error in judgment, but I think this will be something that honestly needs to be done. So just take it, take the punches, but say we're going to get better together. And then the Bryarsdale Foundation may feel this is unfair because, as I mentioned earlier, the school is going to take over fundraising efforts to ensure that the outside organization doesn't control funds, and I think that's really where the legal issues occur in this case. All right, section 8, choosing the best option. I think it's pretty obvious which way I'm leaning, but I think you have to acknowledge that a mistake was made, and then the school must take over fundraising efforts in the future. Address the stakeholders of the situation, lay out exactly what happens, and then the school and community will move forward together. The next one, the district must take over sole control of fundraising efforts moving forward. This helps avoid unlawful actions in the future to ensure that this doesn't happen again. We're going to learn from our mistakes, make the necessary changes, and then again move forward and create policies and guidelines for each fundraising effort that we have in the future. Okay, I think it's very important to educate yourself and anyone involved in the fundraising efforts on the laws and guidelines attached to these efforts. So again, look at your local state laws and sit down and talk about them, and then make sure you know how to proceed in the future so this doesn't happen again. Section 9, implementing the decision. The first step that must be done as a principal is to meet with the superintendent and develop an action plan. Communication between your superintendent as your boss is vital to this success, and overall communication between yourself and your superintendent and just for the district overall. Okay, communicate with the community and the stakeholders on what happened, how we will move forward together, and this is just you taking ownership of the situation. You are the leader, so this falls on your plate. So that's part of your leadership role. You're going to make mistakes along the way, own up to them, learn from them, and then move forward. 3, develop and outline policies and procedures for fundraising activities. So again, if you're going to have a raffle, lay out some guidelines for anybody who wants to have or host a raffle, and that's just a good check system to make sure you're doing everything that needs to be done. Create a list of acceptable fundraising activities, and then establish guidelines for each to ensure no laws are broken. And then you're going to have to transition the Brazdell Foundation into schools control if possible. If for some reason this doesn't this doesn't go well between you and the foundation, or the school and the foundation for that matter, I think it's best just to terminate that foundation. Remember, in this case, the foundations were created solely for fundraising activities. So again, if this is something that's going to lead to more unlawful actions in the future, it's just best to get rid of the foundation if there can be no happy medium. If you can keep the foundation in place, but you transition power to maybe the principal being in charge, or some other administrator in the school being in charge of the foundation, and keep it together, then that would be great. But it just has to be in the school's ownership. Okay, and that's all the case study. That's my thoughts on the case study. This is a link to the Kansas Revenue Organization, and this was their laws specifically on raffles. So that's where I drew a lot of my information.